Hello, BookTube. I went to the bookstore today, not the Brattle Bookshop, and not a friend's church's basement with boxes full of used books, but an actual retail bookstore. I went to the big Barnes& and Noble here in Boston. A big, beautiful store fronted all along one side of its length by full-length floor-to-ceiling windows with the neat aisles and the neat new display tables and cases and whatnot. A wonderland. I re- depressed to report that it was a deserted wonderland. I went in the middle of the day. There were no customers. There was no activity whatsoever. And also the larger mall, a very upscale urban mall that the bookstore is part of, was almost completely empty. There were a few lonely souls wandering around with masks on. They weren't buying anything. It certainly wasn't the crowded scene that it would have been 3 years ago. I remember that scene very well, even though that scene itself was a bit of a disappointment for me. When we all moved over, the crew of the Barnes & Noble that used to be open in downtown Boston, right around the corner from the Brattle Bookshop, when that store closed, all of us were moved over to the new store across town at the Prudential Center. And it was a very different atmosphere. It was a beautiful, new, state-of-the-art store, whereas our old store had not been beautiful, it had not been new, and it had not been state-of-the-art. It was an ugly, dumpy place that was still full of magic, absolutely full of magic. I often say this to my old friend Deb, we reached that store at the perfect moment in history, when most people still didn't have the internet, much less have it on their phones. And so, all during the course of the morning, all the academics nearby, all the students nearby, all the business people nearby in the business district, all of those people during the morning would be germinating bookish questions, bookish references, even bookish challenges. And when their lunchtime came, they would all come to our Barnes & Noble. So that we had what we called a lunch rush from noon to 2 every weekday. Suddenly the store would go from moderately busy to jam-packed with people lining up at the information desk to ask questions and talk about the answers to those questions. And although a large part of that was born of the simple lack of information, you went to the bookstore information desk in order to get an answer to something that you wouldn't need to do once you had the internet in your pocket. You wouldn't need to do that. A large part of it was born that way, but a large part of it was sustained because of what those people found when they got to that information desk. They found an exceptionally bookish staff. I mean, think about back in those days, or think about even now. You have your phone in your pocket now. It has all the information that exists in the world, literally at your fingertips at any moment of the day or night. Even given that, if you knew that me and Deb were at your Barnes & Noble's information desk from noon to 2 every weekday, wouldn't you go? I bet you would. And a lot of people did. And it was a grand, grand time. And then a series of horrendous managerial decisions eventually shuttered that store. That and the insanity of our landlord. And instead of cutting us all loose, the company just moved us all to the other store in Boston, to the big store at the Prudential Center. Quite a few people took buyouts. Quite a few people just didn't want to make the shift at all. But anybody who did was welcome to do so. And we couldn't help but notice that the new store was very different from the old store. Mainly in its outward appearance, but also it lacked a lunch rush. It wasn't near a business district the way we used to be. It was at the bottom of half a dozen pricey hotels. So people would wander in all the time, but never with that kind of urgency anymore. Never with that kind of very business-like, I need answers to these 6 questions. I've only got 45 minutes. There was nothing like that. But even so, even prepared for how more sparsely attended this store was, I'm never prepared when I go in post-pandemic. I'm never prepared for what I see. I mean, I stood there at one point. I was standing at one of the new release tables, but I was surreptitiously looking at the whole store, and the immediate impression that just bears itself in on you is that this place cannot possibly be making its rent. Not possible. It has to be being underwritten to an enormous amount by the company, the broader Barnes & Noble company. Now, I would love to hear it if your own Barnes & Noble is different from that. if you have a local Barnes & Noble, I think for the purposes, just because we're already on the same wavelength on so much here, I think I'm just going to dispense from now on with the typical angry screed I go on about book snobs who just reflexively hate Barnes & Noble, who just reflexively talk about your local independent bookstore. Remember, people, smiles, everybody. Your local independent bookstore, or I'll destroy you on social media. You can't go to Barnes & Noble. You can't shop on Amazon. Your local independent bookstore. I know the service is worse. I know the selection is very snobbishly censored. But nevertheless, I say so, or you're a bad person. Smiles, like a grade school teacher, like a Stepford wife. I think I can largely dispense with that kind of reaction. A lot of you have given me stories over the years about how your Barnes & Noble is just fine. It's full of bookish people. You really love it. It's sometimes the only bookstore in 100 miles. So we can largely dispense with that, but if I would love, we can largely dispense with that until the next time I feel like ranting on it, then I will forget the dispensation. But if your Barnes & Noble is different, if your Barnes & Noble is active, clearly self-sustaining, I would love to hear that. It would certainly perk up my spirits, because I went to my old bookstore. I spent a quarter of a century working for Barnes & Noble, working in a retail bookstore environment. I don't really know why I did that, and only that, instead of having what the 21st century refers to as a side hustle in book reviewing. I should never have stopped book reviewing. Obviously, I should never have stopped book reviewing. But I did, and went into book selling instead. And naturally, I feel conflicted when I go to a great big new Barnes & Noble full of bookish merchandise, and there's nobody there. That naturally gets to me. But nevertheless, I wandered around. I had a little bit of time. I wandered around, and I did find some things. I didn't get the big basket full of stuff that I once upon a time told myself I would always get if I walked into a Barnes & Noble and I had an employee discount and a fine, generous amount of spending money. I used to tell myself, especially when I was an impoverished worker at that store, looking at things I couldn't even afford to touch, I would often tell myself, well, if you had your employee discount and spending money, if you walked in here of an afternoon just to browse, you'd walk out with a basket full of stuff. That turns out not to be true. Now, a lot of that is not Barnes & Noble's fault. A lot of that is that in the intervening years, I have changed my profession. I've gone back to book reviewing. So I look at new releases on the new release table at Barnes & Noble, and I don't think, gee, I wonder if I can budget in the money. I think, gee, it was nice to get a review copy of that 5 months ago. You've seen that on this channel. I don't look at those new release tables with the kind of longing that I once felt when I was not getting review copies. But I did find some things. I didn't fill a basket, but I found some things. I found a couple of books, a few periodicals, and a bookmark. Barnes & Noble has a spinner rack of tasseled bookmarks, and I love tasseled bookmarks. They're often dorky. They're often dumb, and I got one that's dorky and dumb. It's Be a Reader. Steve, this is the bookmark. Be a reader. Now, I confess, part of that was just nostalgic, was sentimental, because me sainted ma used to hate bees. She just hated them. And so I see something like this, I immediately thought, boy, if she were still around, I would buy this and send it to her, just so that she could read me the riot act. But I also looked at the spinner rack of bookmarks, of tasseled bookmarks, in anticipation of what I'm hoping is some Dune merchandise. I am expecting that one of the only good things I will get out of this coming movie, Dune, will be merchandise. Folders, notebooks, bookmarks, maybe art editions, things like that. I'm hoping for that. I was talking to an old friend at the bookstore, someone who used to work at our old bookstore together when she was a child, and she said that companies have stopped doing a lot of that. That they just don't do a lot of that adjacent merchandising anymore. We'll see. I have a feeling that the movie studio wants to put a lot of effort into making this the Dune of all time, the definitive Dune. And maybe it's anachronistic on my part, but I'm thinking that an essential part of that is that you slap a movie cover on the novel, you bring out a lot of merchandise, a making of book. We'll see. Maybe the studios are so much more cautious now that they'll wait to see if the movie's a hit before they do that. I think at least there's a movie cover to the novel. I think at least that is true. We shall see. I will certainly get it all, so if there's any of it, I will show it to you. Then I got two books. I got two mass-market romance novels. I just got a bunch of romance novels from Amazon in the mail, but I found a couple more, and they share something in common. They're both modern Regency romances, but they share something else in common that you're going to notice by this point. The first one is The Bachelor by Sabrina Jeffries. I have a sneaking suspicion that I already have this, The Duke Dynasty. But maybe not. Maybe I got an electronic advance copy from NetGalley. I did a cursory search for it and didn't find it. This is a modern Regency. Lady Gwyn Drake has long protected her family's reputation by hiding an imprudent affair from her youth. But when her former suitor appears at Armitage Hall, manhandling the heiress and threatening to go public with her secrets, it's Gwen who needs protecting. Her twin brother, Thorne, hires Joshua Wolfe, the estate's gamekeeper, to keep her safe in London during her debut. As a war hero, Joshua feels obligated to fulfill the assignment he has accepted, but as a man, it's torment to be so very close to the beauty he's fought to ignore. That plot sounds familiar. I may have already read this from NetGalley. I'll have to check. The first chapter will tell me. Of course, there's another reason why I got this. It's the same reason as this one by Sophie Jordan. The Duke Goes Down. This is the Duke Hunt series. Kindly get your mind out of the gutter when it comes to that title. This is the cover. And let's see, the plot goes like this. Peregrine Butler's privileged, blue-blooded world is rocked to the core when it's revealed he was born before his parents' marriage and therefore is not the legal heir to the dukedom. Facing ruin, Perry must use his charm and good looks to win an heiress, all the while ignoring his fascination with the one interfering and alluring young woman who is intent on sabotaging his efforts. And if I know my Regency romances correctly, he will find that he loves that annoying woman, and she won't be an heiress, but it will turn out at the end of the book that he is actually the heir to the dukedom. But that sounds fascinating, and I would get this anyway. You'll notice there's something these two Regency novels have in common, and that is the unmistakable cheekbones of one Paul Marin. So they go on my apparently endless collection of Paul Marin Regency romances. So I got two books and a bookmark at the bookstore, but I also got some periodicals. One of them is very well known to me. I have written for them. This is the American Conservative. And this thing is, it has, after Trump, is Ohio ready for J.D. Vance and a bunch of other political stuff. But of course, with any magazine like this, I looked straight for what is referred to as the back of the book. We've got the frothing at the mouth political commentary at the front of the book, but at the back of the book, allegedly protected by a brain-blood barrier that's not supposed to be breached, you have book reviews. And sometimes you are a paying game in town, so you'll get book reviewers who will go to the American Conservative, I did, or elsewhere, and say, well, I don't agree with any of the politics at the front of the book, but the magazine's policy is that I don't have to. I can write a review of something for the back of the book without it being politically skewed at all. Now, if I remember correctly, the American Conservative holds true to that. But we will see. I haven't actually read these issues, so we've got David Randall reviews the new reissue of The River War by Winston Churchill. I want that reissue, so I'll gladly read the review. What else have we got here? Someone named Ian Dowbiggin reviews Sean McMeekin's book, Stalin's War, which I have written about, and which I have. Fantastic. John Wilson reviews The Adventures of Miss Barbara Pym by Paula Byrne, the book that caused a little bit of a kerfluffle elsewhere in the critical world. And let's see here. Joseph Phelan reviews a new display at the Met on the Medici. Portraits and Politics, 1512 to 1570. Boy, a Met exhibit I will never see. How wonderful that would be to see that, to walk around that, brochure in hand, really enjoying it, soaking it up, maybe get lunch nearby, maybe go to the Strand. What I wouldn't give to do that, except I won't do it without Frida. I won't do it without Frida. I won't consent to leave her behind in Makepeace or inadequate care while I go and enjoy myself in New York City, which renders my options down to two. I can either take her with me, in which case I can't go to the Met or any museums or the Strand, I can just bring her to Central Park. That would be a lot of fun on its own. But the other option would be to make sure that the dog care that I leave her in when I go to New York is up to my own standard. And as several of you have pointed out, and as I point out myself, that basically means my old friend Deb, who's not free to dog sit. So that's just ruled out. And also the Nick Rowan reviews Crossroads, the new Jonathan Franzen novel. I should have led with that. That's a big one. Who is now? I automatically want to know who Nick Rowan is. How will I find that out? Oh, okay. So it looks like the author biographies are given at the end of their reviews. So let's go to the end of his review. He is a reporter for the Washington Examiner. Okay, that tells me nothing at all. So I got the American Conservative. Then I got another. This is another sort of literary periodical that I have got before at Barnes & Noble. I grab it whenever I'm there. I haven't subscribed, but maybe I will rectify that because it is jam full of book reviews. It's all book reviews, as you'd expect. It's the Literary Review. And it is just jammed full. Let me give you a glimpse here of that's the table of contents. Just one book review after another. I've got this in the past and enjoyed it. Although one of the problems I had with it is that a huge amount of the stuff that's reviewed in here is not out in America, which means that the whole thing is a huge standing temptation to me. My remit, my beat, is the new books that are coming out in the 15 to 16 genres I read in America. That is ruling out the new books that are coming out in Germany or France or the UK. That rules them out. And this is just a huge temptation. But I can still enjoy it for the reviewing, for the talent of the reviewers. And then this last thing, the last periodical that I got is one that I'd never seen before. This is issue number 5, so it's had 4 issues before it. The young woman that checked me out at the register said that she actually subscribed to it and has seen it at this Barnes & Noble more than once. So I have missed the earlier 4 issues. If any of you are familiar with this thing, feel free to tell me all about it. This is a magazine, a square-bound magazine called Oh Reader. That's all about reading. It's for the love of reading. That's all it is. It's all about reading. It looks to me like it is mostly essays about reading. And it looks to me like the house rule is that none of those essays can be by men. And I haven't checked the actual masthead, but I'm assuming that everyone who works for this thing is a woman, and there are no men. And that I'm assuming that's not random either. That is corporate policy. I don't so much. I mean, that's obviously discriminatory and sexist if it's true, but I don't so much mind it in terms of what I'm going to read. I don't really care one way or another unless the reviews also hate men and say, well, isn't reading great? Too bad no men ever do it. If it's something like that, if the obvious politics of the thing seep into the pieces, then they won't be for me. But what if they don't? I don't know how this thing is done. There are, as far as I can tell, there are no ads in this thing, even on the back. And I don't know how you produce this and get it sent to Barnes and Nobles all over the country without being able to pay for it. Unless maybe this is a Barnes and Noble production. It could be that this is entirely underwritten by Barnes and Noble. One way or another, if any of you know, feel free to let me know. I haven't read any of the things in here yet. If I like it, a regular periodical about the joys of reading, I'd certainly take that. Absolutely. So there you go. That's a little video for you about a trip to the bookstore. It didn't knock my socks off. Obviously, as you can tell. I got some magazines that I could easily live without. I got a bookmark that I could easily live without. I got a couple of romances that I need like a new hole in the head. It wasn't the enormously fulfilling experience that I sometimes still reflexively associate with going to a big retail bookstore with money in my pocket and time on my hands. You think about that as sort of a version of heaven. Well, this is not the first time that I have done that and walked out with basically trivia. And I don't think that's only because I have access to something like the Brattle Bookshop. The Brattle Bookshop in Boston, with thousands of fascinating books that already have character to them and that aren't overpriced. I don't think it's just that. I don't know, one way or another. I guess basically I would love to hear your stories about shopping at your Barnes & Noble. Is it a wonderland for you? And if it isn't, was it once? I'd love to hear all of that. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. Just want to show you some bookish stuff, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.